Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Introverted Indies. I'm Lucy A. McLaren, and alongside my fellow indie author Lydia Baker, we set up Introverted Indies as a platform to chat to fellow indie authors because we know how difficult it can be as introverts and indie authors to get the word out about your books. So today I'm joined by KF Goblin. I'm going to hand over to you, KF, to introduce yourself.
Alrighty, so hi everyone. I'm KF Goblin. I am a rural Alberta, Canada author out in the lovely West, and I'm primarily a romance. I suppose you'd call it a fantasy romance author. Simply fantasy because none of my characters are human. But I jump around in subgenre. So I've done things from strict romantasy. That was that was my debut, to sci-fi western, to a twisted take on a small town, and we're jumping back in time with my next release to a historical western. So it's always romance, but it's always a little bit something different.
Yeah, that's definitely got a complete mishmash of different genres there. So it's what draws you to each of those different genres that you've written in?
Well, I guess we can start at the beginning. Like I said,
Yeah.
none of my characters are human. As you can see here on the cover, this is Snowclans. This was my debut novel. And this whole thing started because I guess like one of my biggest inspirations as an author is the author Brian Jacques. So you can kind of see I have a little shrine up here of all of his books. He
Amazing.
wrote the Redwall series, which are about, I don't know if you're familiar, but they're little mice that live in an abbey that chaos seems to just be magnetized to this abbey, whether it's a vicious sea rat trying to take it over or a giant wild cat who's trying to burn down the entire forest. It's just a great universe, and I wanted to write a fan fiction of my favorite villain, and I kept breaking the universe rules that Brian Jacques had set up. And a friend of mine just kind of got tired of me complaining about breaking the universe rules. And she said, just write your own damn book. So I did. And that's how this was born. It took ages because I had to basically dismantle the entire fan fiction I had been working on and turn it into its own thing. And that's how Draven, this guy here, was created. He's basically like Clooney the Scourge's love child, if you could imagine such a thing. And instead of making him just a regular rat like Clooney was in the books, I made him a wolf rat. So I've always been drawn to anthropomorphic books, anthropomorphic characters. Not to say that I don't read regular historical romance, it's my favorite genre actually, but I just wanted to do something like twisted on it, because you don't see a lot of it for adult readers, you see a lot of it for like youth, or, I guess what they call now new adult or whatever. And so that's just kind of how it started. But then I was, sitting there, I was in a writing slump with Snowclans, and I was like, well, I need to do something totally different. And so I truly did something completely different with my next book, which was C.A.M.P. And it's a sci-fi western military romance. So it's all like this sci-fi dystopian future, but it's not the future because it's very hearkening to older times. It's definitely, I lovingly call this Mad Max meets the good, the bad, and the ugly, just because I love old westerns. I love spaghetti westerns, and I also really like occasionally a little twist of sci-fi. But I just, I jump around because if I do the same thing over and over again, I feel like I'm just rehashing the same stuff. It's why my series, if I write them, are two books. I have not a hard and fast rule, but a pretty strict rule of it's a duology or it's a standalone. So I don't get stagnant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and I can understand why you're going for just completely starkly different genres each time because it's like there's just a completely new, exciting
Yeah,
uh, world to jump into.
totally.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I can totally understand why you'd want to do that. It sounds really fun. So we'll go back to Snow Clans then. So that was your debut.
That was.
So when did you write that? What was the process around that?
So, like I said, this started off as a shameless fan fiction. But it's in total, Snowclans took from start, which includes like the really shameless fan fiction part, to being published 3 years, just because of all that reworking I had to do. It definitely is. This project always seems to be like the one where I'm like banging my head against the desk and going, oh, why can't I just figure it out? And that includes its sequel, which got a total overhaul, and it is coming this year. I have a couple readers who are like, "Where's the sequel to SnowClans?" Because the finale of Camp is already out. Where's this one? And it's just because this man right here gives me a hard time. He really does give me a hard time. But, I love this story. Like this story, because it's my first, right? It holds
Yeah.
such a near and dear place in my heart. Draven as a character is so tragic and he's heart-wrenching, and your heart bleeds for him. But he's also, I've been told by a friend of mine, actually a coworker, she found out I was a writer, which freaked me out a bit. She came up to me, she said, "I really like SnowClans, but my God, he's an asshole." It's like, that's kind of the point. He's kind of not lovable in the beginning. And she's like, "No, but he's a jerk the whole way through." And she just really didn't like his kind of brazenness. But it's because the boy has trauma and he has to work through it. But it was just kind of getting a lot of input in the beginning. I'd write a couple chapters, I'd read it to friends, I'd get them to go through and like point out mistakes I was making. Those first 4 chapters, I call them my Frankenstein chapters, because I had about 6 different people in there just being like, "No, you should put this here and re-say it this way." And I look at those first 6 chapters and I'm like, ooh, that's not my voice. But, I kind of kept them. My editor, she didn't change them very much, because she said it's kind of interesting to see the different tonal shift as the story continues. And I think that it's almost important that that happens. But, whereas this one took ages and ages, this one fell out of me in 9 months. So it's definitely a different process. And I find I'm a very quick writer, I can finish a book in anywhere from 3 months, which was my quickest,
Wow.
to
Yeah.
uh to 9 months now. It just really depends. I also always have multiple projects on the go, so I'm never stagnant. If I'm writing and I get stuck, I go, "Okay, time to pivot," and I jump into one of my, I think I currently have 12 active projects. So, yeah.
Yes, a lot to choose from. And do you find that helps? Like if you get kind of stuck on one project, get a bit of writer's block, going to something else helps to clear that block for that
Oh
project?
yeah. Oh yeah. And I usually pivot to something that's totally different. It's always cuz I got really hung up on Blood Clan, which is the sequel to Snow Clan. I got really stuck because I have a friend of mine who read for me for a while, who I'd finish a chapter, be like, "Okay, go read it, let me know what you think." Cuz she was one of the first people to read my books. And she kind of gave me like a really really hard blow. She said, "I'm going to be honest with you." Because I was like 80% done the book at this point. She's like, "If I wasn't your friend and I didn't love Draven, I would have DNF'd this book." And I was like, "Oh my gosh. Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's rough." And she was really kind about it. I'm obviously paraphrasing. She was not mean at all. But I needed to hear it because
Right.
I rethought everything. I but it took me a long time. I feel like it's just this jerk right here gives me a hard time, because my other books, it'll just be like, "Oh, here's the idea, I want to do it, let's go write it, word vomit it out, okay, it's done." It's just super easy. But Draven and his whole world was just like, "I'm gonna make you really work for it."
What do you think it is about his character? Because you said obviously he's got trauma to work through. Is that an element of it, like working through that alongside the character, or?
Yeah, I think a big thing with Draven too is like, so I guess it's not super spoilers to kind of talk about what he's gone through, because oh boy, he deals with a lot in the book. But his past, he watched basically his whole family get destroyed. He, at a very young and tender age, was left with his 2 twin younger brothers, and he's trying to take care of them and his clan, and they get ripped out of his arms because he is an outsider, because he's been labeled as someone with blood rage, which is a ludicrous thing that was made up by northerners. He's actually just a blood mage. So they think that it's this curse when really he's a mage, but no one in the north knows what this is, because his fathers were from the deep south, far away different lands, and they never have seen blood mages in the north. And so he gets labeled as this monster and ostracized from his community. And all the while, his chief wants this power. And he was trying to get it from his fathers, but they ended up dying because of what he was doing to them. And so he targets Draven, and he's like, "I'm going to get this power from you." And he's just like knee high to a grasshopper. He's just this little
Mm.
boy. And he endures his whole life. And it's horrible things he goes through, physical, mental, and emotional abuse. And even to the point where as a teenager he gets sent away because his chief Asgard can't deal with him anymore. He's just that. He's like, I'm gonna kill him, but if I kill him the whole clan will know and then it's gonna be a mess. So he sends him away in hopes that he will die when he gets sent away to an allied clan. And Asgard sends a note, make sure he doesn't come home. And his back literally gets broken as like 17 years old. And he has to relearn how to walk again. And so he even will overcome that. And he did it in a very short amount of time. Like he shouldn't have been able to do this. And it's because of that magic that he has in him that like helps him heal faster. But he had no idea this whole time. And it wasn't until he was an adult, like almost 30, when the book is happening, that he starts to uncover all of these lies that he's been told his whole life and
Mm.
all of this deception. And there's a lot of like a lot of things that Draven goes through that just makes him this character that should hate everyone, should have no kindness in him, and all of these like big things. But he finds love. He, at first, it was, I'm just going to claim a prize. Like, I just want this for not the good reason. But Aveen, who's the main character, she's like, well, no, I want him. Like, I want a strong, just someone just as strong and strong-willed as I am. I need that.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of softens him and he makes her a little tougher. And they're a really beautiful compliment, but she calls him out on all of his bullshit. So whenever he's being a jerk, she just calls him out and he can't handle that because he's the general in his clan. Like is from a militaristic clan. So he's like people are afraid of him. They don't question him. They don't talk back to him. And she's always, you're being a jerk. Like, stop it. Like, go sulk in the corner then. I don't care. Like, she totally
Mm-hmm.
calls him on everything. And it just drives him nuts. And so the first book, he doesn't really grow necessarily as a character because that happens in book two. And
Yeah.
that's where I really got hung up on it. And it's almost to the point where I was focusing so much on Draven growing as a character that I wasn't
Mm.
letting the plot have room because I wanted him
Right.
to grow, which was the point of the story. It's his story of growth and overcoming all of his past and finally letting it go and moving forward. But there's also a lot of other things. And because I focused so much on him growing up, the book
Mm-hmm.
was dry. It was really dry. So I needed to add a whole bunch of other elements in
Yeah.
afterwards, which was really difficult because you'd think, oh, I have this finished thing or just about finished thing. Now I'm just going to go in and add little details to make the plot like, oh, what's this? What's happening? Like a secondary subplot. But it was very difficult because
Mm.
where's the appropriate spot to inject this
Mm-hmm.
subplot?
Yeah, because if it kind of happens as you're writing it, it flows more naturally, doesn't it? It makes
Yeah.
sense where you put it in. But yeah, it sounds as though like Draven is a character that you know so much about. You have such a huge backstory for him and
Hmm.
an aim for where you want him to get to that he became such a big focus for the story.
Yeah.
And so now you're working on shifting it away from that, like adding more in.
Yeah. And it was definitely a trial for sure.
Hmm.
My editor is going to see because in my document I would put all these notes beside my chapters where it was like new content added, or I'd put like a little note be like you need to finish this war part and then do this. And
Hmm.
so she'll see all of those things I was like telling myself as I was writing just to
Hmm.
keep the book flowing, or add this part about Giovanni here and da 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 da, like just crazy. She's gonna be like, what is this?
Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's
Yeah,
all part of the process.
totally.
So you mentioned you've got obviously romance seems to be like the thread that links all of your
Yeah,
books together, right? So there's always a romance element to it. So is that something? Because you said you read historical romance
yeah,
as a reader. So
yeah,
was it always the case that you were going to have like some kind of romance in the stories that you tell? Do you think?
yeah, absolutely. It's always the key like hinge pin of all these stories is
Hmm.
the love between the two main characters. And that's also probably why Blood Clan took so darn long, because the
Mm.
romance part was over. There's no
Right. Okay.
courting, there's no falling in love, there's no
Yeah.
relationship development in the second book. It basically, I wrote myself into this is just a fantasy with a couple romantic scenes at the beginning, and the rest of the book has nothing. And so it was like, oh man. Because like
Hmm.
the romance part is what I love. It's that courtship, that building the relationship, understanding each other, building those bonds, testing each other, those kinds of things. That's what I really love. And that's why Camp, my second book that came out, was so easy because these two, it's like it's complicated because it's like it's a dystopian future, but it's not a future because they've
Hmm.
decided to go back in time in the methods that they live.
Hmm.
It's a military romance, so they're on a military base. And then there's all this sci-fi junk of like who these guys are. So CAMP actually stands for the Cybernetic Animal Mutation Project, and they are super soldiers for the Western Beastmen military. And it's this whole big thing, very different world. Like these two could not be any more different if you tried. But these two, I kind of pulled in the trope of fated mates. I wanted, like, the moment they saw each other, it was like, there they are. Like, that's my person right there. And so he is the lieutenant of the Cybernetic Animal Mutation Project, which is
Hmm.
supposed to be a debunked project that shouldn't exist anymore, but it's secretly operating in the background. And she is a runaway slave who escaped the Slavers Guild, which is this other part of their society, basically. And so she's running and he is doing a cleanup job essentially because he is a bit of a jaded arsehole who is constantly in and out of isolation. And they were like, go just do this errand boy task because we're all annoyed at you right now. And he's like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I'm super annoyed that I'm here. And then she comes running through and he's like, okay, maybe I care a little bit. So it's kind of an immediate like, oh, I got to keep her safe. I got to love her. I have to,
Hmm.
but I don't know why. Like it's literally like in my bones. It's like protect her, keep her, don't let anything happen to her. And for her it's the same thing. It's like that is your protector. He is yours. Stay with him and you will live. And so that's kind of like their initial, they have this weird magnetic draw. They don't know why they trust each other, but they do. And so that's kind of where they're kind of having this weird navigation of like, why do I trust him so much? Why do I like her so much? But we can't help it. It's like this, here you are. And so there's like immediate kind of romantic tension on his side, especially because he can't stop admiring her. And like, obviously, she's doing the same.
Hmm.
And I really changed up with this book too. This was my first time experimenting with dual POV. So I wrote it in
Right.
first person. Normally I write third person omnipotent, I believe is the word,
Hmm.
where you kind of get all the internal thoughts and it's all third POV. But this one I bounced back and forth between Kane, which is the name she ends up giving him, because he goes by Lieutenant C1N5, that's his code name,
Hmm.
and Sparrow. So like each chapter, or like, I'll mark it if it's a split chapter or whatever. It's their thoughts, their feelings, what's going on around them. And Sparrow's actually my first openly, I don't say it explicitly in the book, but like, if you know, you know, which most people do. She's my first openly autistic main female character. Because I also have autism, and I was like, well, why not? And so she kind of has to deal with, on top of being in this dystopian, war ridden world, she's autistic, and
Hmm.
now she wants to be at his side on a military base and earn her place in a military that does not employ women. So it's this whole big thing for her where she has to like find her confidence and work on herself. And in the first book, you see a little bit of it, but then, once we get into the sequel, that's where
Hmm.
Sparrow really grows and shines. And so this book is really like, well, you can see the difference. Like,
Mm.
this one is really setting up the story, setting up the world building, building their relationship, and then kind of like the time gap between these two books happening is like a couple weeks. So it's literally like one long continuous, but just split into two books. So it's like their romance is something so wonderful. And you'll notice on the cover of the sequel, there is a third gentleman here, or a second gentleman here. There's a reason for that. Banjo, who is the sergeant on the base, is Kane's best friend. And they were known to share in the past. And
Hmm.
this time is no different. But it's strange because Kane is so in love with Sparrow. And before he never would care about these things. But
Mm.
he's really in love with her and he's really protective of her. But
Hmm.
Sparrow and Banjo built this very deep and special bond because they're both autistic. And
Right.
so it's like he's finally with someone who understands how hard it is for him. And she
Mhm.
is like, thank you for seeing me. And like, anytime, like, where Banjo has more social issues, he has that hard time building any kind of trust or relationship with people. He has a lot of trauma in his past as well.
Mhm.
Sparrow is more like, she has just a metric ton of sensory issues. So Banjo sees that in her.
Yeah.
And like, for example, when they go into a base camp, when they're on a mission,
Mhm.
it's super loud. There's generators going, there's trucks blaring, there's like over 1,000 people there running all over the place, making a whole bunch of noise. And Sparrow's like, I can't function, I can't do
Mm.
it. Like, my brain is melting. And Banjo just pulls out, because he's an explosive specialist, he pulls out ammunition grade earmuffs and he just puts
Mhm.
them on her head. Like, he doesn't even say, he's like, blunk, there you go, breathe, like, you'll be okay, I'm right here. And she just like immediately goes, oh, thank you, I can think again. And so then, he sees the things that Kane doesn't.
Mhm.
And in a way, it drives Kane nuts because he's like, well, how did you know that? And he's like, do you even look at her? Like, just look at her for 10 minutes and you'll figure it out,
Mhm.
And it's where Kane is so affectionate and he's so overbearing at times that he doesn't realize he's doing her disservices. And Banjo's kind of the opposite, where he's like, what are you doing? Like, stop. Like, she's fine. She can do this. Like, you're the problem here, not her.
Mhm.
And so they kind of are this perfect balance for her of
Yeah.
one gives her tools and tells her go do it, and the other one's like, no, let me keep you safe.
It sounds like a really interesting dynamic, and it's yeah, so interesting to me that because you obviously know your characters so well, and it's the relationships that your characters are building that's kind of like the heart of the story.
Yeah.
But around that, you've got like really complex world building that you're like, yeah, it's just fine, that just happens. Like the characters are the important thing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you're creating these really complex, interesting worlds. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you like plan when you write a story, or do you jump right in and start writing it, or how does it work?
So what I do, honestly, and it's probably why I focus so much on character and not really like explaining the whole world building piece. So when I start a story, I have this notebook that I write down. I put, because titles come to me instantly. So I knew right away that camp was going to be called camp. I wanted it to be an acronym and I just had to figure out the letters and what they each meant. It was more so I saw camp really clearly in my mind, and I was like, okay, what does that stand for?
Yeah.
So, and so I was like, will it be base camp? Will it be something deeper? And then I was like, oh wait, cybernetic, because they're all, they're cyborgy kind of like mechanically made soldiers. They're animals. They've been slightly mutated, and it is a project. Done. It just took me that time. But I get the title first, and then I get the characters. So I knew right away it was like a Sparrow Morning Song. I really wanted that character. And then kind of subplot in this book because I'm Catholic, so
Mhm.
I include a lot of biblical referencing in my books.
Mhm.
Um, and in my earlier books, it was before when I wrote SnowClan's Camp and Wildflower, which is my other book that we can talk
Mhm.
about. I had left the Catholic Church for a long time, and I've only just come back to it. But when I
Mhm.
reread Camp, I go, wow, there's some really obvious biblical stories here because Cain is the main male character and he
Mm.
has a brother on base. Well, not like they all refer to each other as brothers, who's named Abel. And they have
Right.
this huge fight throughout the entirety of the first book to the point where they cannot stand each other, and Cain threatens to kill Abel many times. He's like, get away from me, I cannot stand you. And
Mhm.
so I didn't even, at the time, I didn't fully appreciate what I was doing
Yeah.
until it laid out in front of me. So I get the names and then I go, okay, I got Sparrow, I got Kane, and I want this like redneck hillbilly, like I really want him. And I'm just gonna reference him as Banjo because he's a banjo player. And that ended up saying his name. And I write out who they are. Okay, Sparrow is this, she's autistic, she's really driven, da da da, and I write it all out, I write it all out. What are her needs, what are her wants, what are her desires? And I write
Mhm.
all that out. And then I go to the next character and do the same thing. And then if there's a third, like in this case, I do that as well. And then I start plugging in major plot points. So I'm like, okay, Kane and Sparrow fainted mates. Banjo comes in later on. And this is kind of the world. Like I'll skim it out, I'll rough it out, and then as I'm writing, I add all these details.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, I'm a huge fan of this series here, the Redwall series,
Mm.
and the world building is so fluid through all the books that like if especially if there's sequels, because there's a few sequels in that series. Most of them are
Mm.
standalone. Like you could just pick up, and that's what I love about the Redwall books is you can pick up a Redwall book. It doesn't matter if it's the first one or the 15th one, and you can start reading it and understand the story. Like you don't need all the others. And so while I don't think I've quite mastered that because my duologies really do rely on each other, I think that I've gotten some of those elements down where we establish like what's going on, who are the bads, who are the goods, what's the problem. But I really would say, if you want to read this one, you have to read the first one just because they are one after the other. There's not
Mm.
really like a time jump or anything. And it's the same with Snow Clans actually. But I did it with Wildflower and its sequel, where it helps a lot if you read this one, but technically you do not need to read Wildflower to read Edelweiss, which is coming
Okay.
sometime later this year.
Hmm.
But it would really help if you read this. Just because they are separate stories, but they do interlock quite a bit. And so, like, I focus on the characters so much. And then I just, like, really loosely write it out. And it might take me 3 or 4 pages in my notebook of, like,
Hmm.
this is going to happen, then they're going to do this, and then they're going to do this, and then this guy will come in, and then da 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 da. Okay. Now I have to turn it into a 400-page book. So, but I always start with my characters in mind.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it evidently works, doesn't it? 'Cause like you said, you've written a book in 3 months at your quickest, which is fantastic. So
Yeah.
tell us more about Wildflower then. So that's your Western.
So Wildflower is
Hmm.
this is my twisted take on a small town romance. It's
Right.
a little
Hmm.
bit nostalgic because it's set
Hmm.
in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And, my twist on this is the main male character is a 500-year-old Russian lust demon.
Oh.
So Reykjavik, which is this guy here, Reykjavik is a lust demon. So he was born in what is now called Moscow. He was a military serviceman for basically his entire, what they would consider adult life as a demon. Demons aren't really welcomed into society until they're about 150 years old. So he was, a soldier his whole life. And he had to basically dad would say you're going to do this and he'd go okay, how many times do you want me to do it. His mom was a dancer, she was a prima ballerina, and he had to do every kind of dance. His father, he dabbled in music as a younger man, so Reykjavik had to learn how to play 36 different instruments. And he also had to be the highest of high rank military officers because he had to make the Petrikov name look good. And he just got burnt out. He was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And
Hmm.
he gets burnt out just as World War I is really coming to a climax. He's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I am tired. I can't. And I I have snuck in references because I do all real world historical referencing in this book in particular. Actually, believe it or not, in C.A.M.P as well, because it is a dystopian future. So lots of real human history is referenced in this. Sparrow reads the book A War to End All Wars, which is a book about World War I, and her favorite musician is John Denver. So there's a fun twist there. But basically, like Reykjavik, I'm not sure if you're familiar with World War I history, but I've snuck in the reference in there that he was part of the famous attack on Russia by the Germans and known as the Undead Army because the Germans threw mustard gas into a Russian bunker and gassed them out. But the thing with mustard gas is it's not instant. And so they said, well, we're already dead. Let's take out as many of them as we can. And because
Hmm.
he's a demon, he didn't die. It just didn't, like, it sucked. It was very uncomfortable, but he didn't die. And so that was kind of his break. He was like, I am done. I'm not doing this anymore. And he goes to his dad and he's like, I cannot be here anymore. Like, I need to get out of the country. Get me out of Europe. Like, I please just help me. I'm so tired. And his dad is like, if you're leaving your position, you might as well be dead to me. And he's like, okay, fuck all of you. And he gets out of Europe and he goes to America. And he ends up moving to as far away from everyone as he possibly can in the south of Texas in the Chihuahuan Desert. And he lives in a shitty trailer and he doesn't care. And he's like, I am alone and I am content. I am a hermit. Leave me alone. And so, he lives down there for about 50, 60 years. and he's very content, but he stumbles into, well, he's kind of pushed into the direction of Carmen, who we see younger here on the cover. Carmen is a domestic abuse victim, and she is worn down, and he recognizes that. He sees how tired she is. He sees how, he can physically see how abused she is, because when he first meets her, she is a fresh shiner. She's battered. She's exhausted. She looks rough. She has dried blood still on her face, but she's just at the bar getting a beer because she needs it. And the bar owner is named Marge, and Marge knows Ricky very well. And she also knows Carmen because it's her daughter's childhood friend. She's basically like, come on, Ricky, you're the local guy. Like, give her a good night. Like, she needs it. And he's like, I don't normally do girls who are attached or married, but all right. So at first it's just this like, I'm doing my buddy a favor and like I'll get a top up while I'm here because, as I mentioned, he's a lust demon, so he feeds off of sexual energy. And he's like, all right, 2 for 1. And so it starts off very, innocuous. Like he's kind of, he's playing it cool. He's like, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. Because she kind of says some things, some off-color things, because her guard's up. And he's like, listen, I don't have to put up with this. Like, you can just leave if you want. And she's like, no, 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 I'm really sorry. Like, please. And so they end up having a great time. But her phone gets blown up because it's the old days with the flip phones. So it's just vibrating and ringing nonstop. And finally he's like, holy shit. Like, what is going on? And she's like, that's my husband. I have got to go. And something in him is like, I can't let this girl go back to that. Like, it's like she's battered. Like, what kind of man am I to like let this woman willingly go back into the arms of someone who I know is going to hurt her? And he really eats him up, and it eats him up for a few days because he brought her back to his trailer, and she ends up showing up, and she's in bad condition, like very bad, to the point where he has to pull out, like, he has to rack his brain of his old first aid training from when he was a soldier and fix her up because she's not in a good condition. And so it's just kind of, basically he gives her the line, you've made it my problem now, so you're gonna do it my way, and we're gonna do, like, you're not gonna argue with me. And so he kind of starts dealing with all these problems for her, but in the process of like giving her just like, you know come park your trailer on my land, I have all this land, I'll have my space, just don't piss me off, like don't be in my face all the time. And so she's like, yeah, of course, I'll give you your space. But of course, they're not giving each other space because they're totally falling for each other. And he absolutely falls for her first. Like, he's like slowly becoming obsessed with her. And he's like, why? I'm a demon. I shouldn't care. But he can't not think about her. And in the process of them like building this relationship, not only does Carmen learn how to love herself again and put herself first, she also learns how to have her courage again, and she stands up for herself. And they go on all this crazy stuff. Like, they go all the way back to Moscow because of major things I can't spoil. But they end up going back to Russia and seeing dear old mom and dad. And Reykjavik wants nothing to do with Victor, which is his father. And he's kind of meh about seeing his mom, but he knows that his mom was just as much a victim of that situation as he was. So he doesn't have as much animosity towards his mother, but he's still a little bitter. And it's like, not only is it Carmen kind of working on herself and making herself feel better, but it's also Ricky dealing with his daddy issues. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and did you say there's a sequel to that one coming out as well?
Yeah, there is. So Edelweiss is actually about Reykjavik's great uncle Ulfis Petrokov, who is the reason that the legend of Krampus exists. So it's his story, and Ulfus is just as much an eccentric hermit as Reykjavik is, if not worse. And he ends up having to be forced to come back to Russia and spend some time with the family. And he really doesn't want to. So it's a whole thing, and he kind of has to confront that issue that he has of not dealing with the past and that kind of thing. I reference, if I don't know if you're familiar with the fall of the basically the nobility, for lack of a better word, in Russia during 1918. Petrograd was a great example. I reference that quite a bit, and that's why Ulfis has so much fear being back. But that, I mean, many of those riots happened throughout history, so his is a bit older. Petrograd was kind of more of Ricky's time, and I reference that a lot as well. I make a joke about Ivan the Terrible, which I think is hilarious, and not many people get it, but I think it's funny. So there's a lot of historical referencing in my books, especially in Wildflower.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. So, because you said that one, of course, Edelweiss, it makes sense why you could read them separately, but
Yeah,
obviously there's going to be stuff in there they're linked in so
yeah.
far as his family and the story. Is there overlap at points in terms of
Yes,
story and
absolutely.
characters? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Edelweiss, is that due out shortly, or is that something you're working on at the moment, or?
It's finished. So right now it's looking. So my next release is actually next week. I have The Widow Sterling is coming out. It's a historical western, and so after that it'll be Blood Clan. Finally, I know all my readers are very annoyed that that was not my first release for 2025, but it's coming. After that, it's going to be another historical western called Miss Tilly Ray. And then I'm hoping Edelweiss will be the fourth release of the year. And then my fifth release, it's a toss up right now.
So tell us more about your historical western then. Sorry, what was the name of it? The one coming out next week?
Widow Sterling. So it is about I love this story so much. So Beatrice Sterling is the widow. She's actually known as Widow McAllister. That was her late husband's name. But her late husband was a bit of a bastard. And she, when she first got married, she was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and eager to be a wife. And her late husband, because it was an arranged marriage, wanted nothing to do with her. And for reasons that I won't reveal because that is a major plot point, but he wanted nothing to do with her. And it hardened her. It made her, I say in the synopsis, she's tough as nails and cold as ice. And she just becomes bitter and her heart is gone. The heart she once had, this loving, caring, nurturing girl that she grew up being, just dies with him. And there is a local banker named Hawkins Haley who's after her land because he's drilling for oil and he wants her farm. And she won't give it up. She's like, I'm keeping this out of sheer spite. No. But she's a lone woman running a dairy farm in basically the 1870s.
Right.
So she can't do it on her own. And so she's put ads in the paper to hire a farmhand. And Hawkins Haley, the banker, keeps sending his goons. And so she keeps running them off her farm with her famous rifle and shotgun. And everyone says, like, she's the Wicked Widow. She's the Wicked Widow Sterling. Because she won't keep her late husband's name. She immediately changes her name back. And so everyone in town, like, makes these horrible rumors about her. And she doesn't care. She's like, they can think what they want about me. I could give a care. And finally, this poor guy named Rufus shows up. And he genuinely is answering her ad. And he is definitely someone who's down on his luck. He's trying to fix his life. And he needs this job more than anything. And he has a lot to deal with. One, because he's a bit older now. He's almost 40. And he's also a mixed breed. So his father was a fox and his mother was jackrabbit. And mixes aren't welcome in those areas. And he has to keep a low profile. But he has this massive scar across his face. He has canines that hang over his lip along with his front blunt teeth. So it's pretty obvious he's a mixed breed. So he's known as a drifter, and it unfortunately comes out that he is a recovered addict. So everybody calls him the junkie drifter. And he goes to her farm, and she doesn't know him from, Adam. And he's like, hello, is anybody home? And he gets a gun in his face. He's like, whoa, okay, I'm just here to apply for the job. And she's like, you're one of them goons from Hawkins, aren't you? And he's like, no, 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 I have no idea who that is. I honestly just want a job. And so she's like, well, all right, I need help anyway. So she gives him a chance, and it's this really lovely story of them stumbling over falling in love with each other. Because Rufus is just like, well, no one could ever love me because of what I am and who I am. And Beatrice is like, I don't have a heart anymore. I could never love anybody. And it's her kind of slowly unveiling her heart and relearning how to love again. And Rufus finding his own worth, because he's the one that tears himself down in this book, not my female character. because I wanted to kind of flip that narrative of it's not always the woman who's insecure, it can be the man, because he is very insecure. And he's really nervous because he's like, I need this job. I can't fall in love with my boss. But she, you know, on the one hand is like starting to really get feelings for him because he's very charming, you know? And it's a great story because there's obviously some sub drama with the banker and all that. And Rufus actually gets some closure with his, because his dad ran off on him when he was a kid, and he gets some closure in that department. He learns a bit about who his dad was, and it's a nice story because Rufus kind of gets this full circle moment of, well, I'm, because he's really angry and bitter about his dad running off on him, and he is trying to figure out how to trust someone and also trust himself in a relationship. And then he gets a bit of closure with his dad, and then he realizes, like, I don't have to be like my dad, I can be better. And Beatrice, for her, it's learning how to love again and how to let people in and how to trust other people, which
Yeah.
she's not good at doing. And there's this book in particular is very special for me because it's the book that helped me realize my faith again, because elements of faith kind of snuck into this book without even me realizing. And it's very important for the book, as well as my next Western that's coming, Miss Tilly Ray. It's even more important in that one. But this one, it was all subconscious. I had no idea that these themes were going to come in as blatantly as they did. And it's funny, I almost say, like, I wrote these scenes without realizing I wrote them. And then when I went back to reread and edit, I was like, whoa, who wrote this in? Like, this wasn't me. I never would have written this. Because there's really beautiful moments of prayer in the book where both Beatrice and Rufus are praying. Beatrice is praying for a sign from God that Rufus actually loves her, even though she's not a religious woman. She's never been. And Rufus, for the first time since his mother dies, gets down on his knees and he prays because Beatrice has an accident and she's not waking up. And he's basically pleading with God, like, please don't take this woman from me. You took my mom already. Please let me keep this one. And those scenes are just like, I bawled rereading them because I didn't really, like I said, I was like, when did I write this? Because I don't remember putting this in here. And I just sobbed reading them. And they're probably my favorite scenes in the book, just because of how tender and important those moments are.
Yeah, it sounds really lovely, and again, you obviously know your characters so intimately, and it's you know, I could listen to you talk about them all day because it's just you obviously just know them so well, and you're able to describe what's happening like without giving spoilers. You're able to just very succinctly explain, you know, the characters and where they're coming from and what happens for them in the story. So, yeah, it sounds amazing. So, what do you do when you're not writing, KF? Because you said you got 12 projects going. You're always dipping in and out of stuff. Like, what do you do outside of that?
So I'm actually a full-time teacher.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I actually teach in a very interesting context. So here in Canada, we have a group of people. I'm not sure if, because you're in the UK, so I'm not sure if you'd ever heard of this, but we have Hutterites here in this part of Canada in the Western Plains, and they're kind of like a splinter off. They're in the same umbrella group, I suppose, as the Amish and the Mennonite.
Okay.
And so I teach on a Hutterite colony, out in the middle of nowhere in very rural Alberta. And I teach kindergarten to grade 9 in a single classroom. So I have
Oh,
12
wow.
students all in different grades.
Hmm.
So I have, a couple here and a couple there. And so I'm running all these different curriculum all at the same time. And, when I talk to colleagues who are not, like, they teach one grade and I teach 10,
Yeah.
basically. Um, they always say, like, how do you keep track? And I'm like, it's the same way when book people ask me how I keep track of 12 books. It's just kind of how my brain works. It must be, like, I always say my superpower is autism because I can just kind of jump around and squirrel around and still remember, oh, I'll jump from one student who's doing number families and crying about having to add and subtract 7, 3, and 4 to then my student who's doing Pythagorean theorem and struggling to understand a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And then I can circle back to my kid doing fractions and then go back to Pythagorean and also number families and go, have we figured this out yet? you know? So it's just, I like getting pulled in all these different directions, just like with my books. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Evidently, your brain just compartmentalizes it all and you're just accessing it when you need to. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So obviously, you've got a lot of experience as well publishing your books at this point. Like, what have you learned? What advice would you give to other authors that are kind of starting out on their journey?
Oh, well, I think the big thing, because when I started, I wanted to publish through a small indie publisher that I actually knew the people, well, not knew them, but I knew of them, who were running this small indie publisher that focused specifically on anthropomorphic, which is what I write, characters. And so I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. And so I submitted to them, and I waited, and I waited.
Mm.
And a year went by. And I kept messaging. I wouldn't be pushy every few months, be like, hey, any updates? No, nothing. No, nothing. No, still haven't even looked at it. Okay, this is getting annoying now.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm like, because I at this point I had 2 books done. I was like,
Hmm.
this is BS. Like, I just want this out. So then, instead of waiting on them, I I drew up my own cover. I do all my own covers. Might as well
Hmm.
use my art degree for something.
Well, they're
Um,
fantastic, must I say. They're
yeah,
really good. Nice.
thank you. Um, so I drew up my own covers, and then I was like, I can, I purchased the software to do all my formatting in. I was like, okay, I got that done. I got the cover done. Now I just need an editor. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was like, hey, my sister-in-law is a really avid reader, and I believe she was like a English major or something when she was in
Hmm.
university. She's like, she might be able to help you. I was like, all right. So then I messaged her, and Crystal has edited every single one of my books, and her and I have learned a lot in this process.
Hmm.
We had a very big, I can't believe we did this moment, where we realized we had forgotten to put, I forgot, and she also missed it, punctuation at the end of dialogue. That
Oh.
wasn't like a question mark or an exclamation mark. I was like, Crystal, why do none of these books have commas or periods at the end of the dialogue? She goes, yes, they do. And I go, I thought that too. So eventually, when I'm not working on so many books, maybe a few years from now, I will go back and re-edit those books. But for now, it's just, it's the charm and quirk of them. So there are just little things that we have learned throughout this whole process. So many things with like editing wise. And for me, it's like when I format a book, it's not hard to, like, with the software I have. I use Atticus because I just like that it's very straightforward and simple.
Hmm.
And so for me, like, I like going through and adding little things. Like, for instance, I always do a voices of. So for me, when I'm listening to music, it'll be like a random song will come on. I'll go, oh my gosh, that's so and so's voice. There it is, and I save it immediately. And so in the front of all my books, except for Snow Clans, I didn't do this because I didn't think of it at the time. I
Hmm.
have a QR code for the Spotify playlist that I
Oh,
make.
cool. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
then at the bottom here, I have, like, if you want to know what Carmen's voice sounds like, it's this song in the playlist. If you want
Hmm.
to know what Ricky's voice sounds like, it's this song in the playlist. And so I did that with all my books after Snow Clans, basically. I started with C.A.M.P, and I was like, oh, I really like that. And then I did a QR code in them that links to my website that I have all my character art that I've drawn of the characters because I draw them to get to know them better. And I have that all linked. And for the first time in a book, I'm like, I'm gonna do a read the other works of that I never thought to do in any of my other books. Like, here's the other books I've written if you want to check them out.
Yeah.
But it's just like little things that you learn. And I think the big thing with authors, just coming back to what you were asking, it's like, if you want to do it, figure out how you can do it independently. Because you're going to get in your lifetime 1,000 rejections before you get half a consideration from traditional
Mm.
publishing. Even going through indie publishing. I only tried once, to be fair. I only went one time and I got frustrated and I was like, I'm just going to do it on my own. And there's so many avenues to do it on your own now. You can do
Yeah.
Ingram Spark, I do Amazon just because it's so simple. Um, and obviously everything has a quirk and a learning curve to it, but figure out how you can do it on your own. Because if you can do it on your own, like my software Atticus to do it, is it perfect? No. Could it be better? Absolutely. Everything in life could be better. But it would cost me $145, and at this point, just to hire someone else to give them the money to do that for one of my books would have been $500.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
paid for
Yeah.
itself. Just because I write big books, like my books are 400 plus pages, and they're not little books. Like this is a 6 by 9. This is 427 pages. So it's a big book,
Yeah.
right? So, everything costs something. So if you can do it on your own, learn how to do it on your own, take the time to, because if you have the patience to write a bloody book, you can learn how to format it.
So
What I
true.
mean? You can even format in Word, from what I
You
understand.
can, yeah.
So you don't even need a fandangled software, but I just couldn't be bothered to fight with Word like that.
No, I'm with you there.
I couldn't be
It's worth
bothered,
paying
but
the money.
I have a friend who actually she edited one of my one of my releases for this year, just because she was kind of in a slump and she needed a distraction. I was like, here you go. It's done. Have fun. And it was she did a great job editing it, to be honest, but she formats everything in Word. Like, she has 2 novels out. She did it all. I was like, how?
Mm,
The patience you have. Like, I could never. But, there's ways to do it on your own. And
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people think like, oh, making your cover on Canva, whatever, whatever. But like, if it's a tool that's there, it's worth using, and obviously be smart with what you're using on Canva. I always say steer away from AI and check that if you're using, any kind of artwork, that it's not stolen. There's been some cases where Canva has ripped things from artists who have not put it out publicly. So just be aware. Like, I always do a reverse Google image search when I use an image off Canva. As long as it comes up as either it's only on Canva or it's a licensable to use, whatever, because I pay for Canva.
Mm,
It's a great resource. I use it for all my
yeah.
social media posts. I have used it to format covers, just to like place the elements in, like the artwork, and then like with snow cones, actually. So I
Mm,
did the artwork, and then I used it to place the text and my signature, and then I used it to edit this picture of the Rocky Mountains that my mom actually took. I was like, hey, can I have that picture? And so I filtered it to hell and I made it super
yeah.
blue and whatever to match the aesthetic. But, it's not a bad thing to use. So
Mm,
there's so many resources out there that are either really cheap, they can be free. If you're really careful with Canva, you can do it for free. And you know what? Like, don't rely on other people. You don't have to. If
mm,
you're willing to put the time in to write a book, you can figure out how to do these things. And I hear people, well, I can't draw. I can't. You don't need to be able to draw anymore. Like, but just please don't use AI, for the love of God.
yeah. Totally agree. Yes, that's great advice. I totally agree with you. I think self-publishing is so much more accessible now, and there are so many tools that can complement what you're doing. Like you said, you've written a book, you can figure the rest out.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
And as quirky as Atticus can be, for 145 bucks, oh man, it saved me a lot of headache.
Yeah.
Like, it's so I cut and paste my edited chapters into it and it formats it automatically.
hmm
I can go in and change the aesthetics of my formatting, what font I want, what this I want, the image headers, all that stuff. You can do it super easily in there.
hmm
It's like, thank you. I don't have to think. Like,
Yeah.
cut,
Yeah.
paste. It's pretty. We're done.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got Vellum, which is basically the same thing.
Yeah.
It makes it so much easier. Yeah. Okay, so we're on to the quick fire round, KF. So one answer, no explanation, although I never seem to stick to that. I always seem to ask questions, but hey, we'll see how we go.
Okay.
Favorite book?
Red Wall by Brian Chalks.
hmm
Yeah.
Favorite game?
I want to say I'm torn between. Are we talking like video game or board game?
Whichever you want. You can say both if you
Um,
want. Favorite of each, you know.
okay. I'm gonna say like favorite video game just because like I look at my like the longevity of playing this game, probably Pokemon. And then board game is most likely I don't know, I've always loved, as much as it can cause fights with people. I love playing Yacht, which is it's kind of like a pirate dice game. I love that one.
Ooh, that sounds
Yeah.
fun. Favorite film?
Ooh, Dragonheart. Sean
I've not
Connery
seen
as a
it.
dragon's beautiful.
And lastly, favorite writing beverage?
Um, Probably my protein coffee that I make. I do like
hmm
a it depends on what flavor of sugar-free syrup I have. Right now it's tiramisu, but it's just
Ooh,
a protein shake with coffee in it and
yeah,
some sugar-free syrup.
that sounds delicious.
It is really good.
Perfect. All right, so we're at the end there. So it's been fantastic chatting to you. So where can we follow you? Because obviously you've got a lot of books coming out this year. You've got a lot of back catalogue. Where can people find out about all these things?
I am most active on Instagram. So all of my social media is at Bookish Goblin with two I's. So BOOKISHGOBLIIN. That's
Hmm.
all my socials. I am on TikTok. I'm not as active on TikTok anymore. I'm trying to get over it, but it's just sometimes you just don't want to.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely on Instagram a lot if you want to get a hold of me. I do post on there. I do a lot of local book signings. So if you're in the Alberta area, I'll drive all the way into Calgary. I've driven all the way up to Edmonton and Red Deer. I have one in Red Deer in March. I have a couple coming up in Calgary here. So you can see me there as well. I'm usually at Indigo or Bailey Books is a fantastic store in St. Albert, Alberta. They're a wonderful family-run bookshop. But yeah, if you can't find me there, you'll find me on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting to learn about you and all your books.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was awesome.
It was my pleasure.